He did," Adams nodded. "I found out a good deal about glue then, too. Been working on it since, I suppose?" "Yes. Kept it in my mind and studied out new things about it." Lohr looked serious. "Well, but see here," he said. "I hope it ain't anything the old man'll think might infringe on whatever he had you doing for him. You know how he is, broad-minded, liberal, free-handed man as walks this earth, and if he thought he owed you a cent he'd sell his right hand for a pork chop to pay it, if that was the only way. But if he got the idea anybody was trying to get the better of him, he'd sell both his hands if he had to keep him from doing it. Yes, at 80 he would. Not that I mean I think you might be trying to get the better of him, Virg. You're a mighty close old codger, but such a thing ain't in you. What I mean, I hope there ain't any chance for the old man to think you might be—" "Oh, no," Adams interrupted. "As a matter of fact, I don't believe he'll have ever thought about it at all, and if he did, he wouldn't have any real right to feel offended at me. The process I'm going to use is one I expect to change and improve a lot different from the one Campbell and I worked on for him." "Well, that's good," said Lohr. "Of course you know what you're up to. You're old enough, God knows." He laughed ruefully. "My, but it will seem funny to me, down there with you gone. I expect you and I both been getting to pretty much deadwood in the place, the way the young fellows look at it, and the only one that'd miss either of us would be the other one. Have you told the old man yet?" "Well," Adams spoke laboriously. No, I haven't. I thought, that's what I wanted to see you about." "What can I do?" "I thought I'd write him a letter and get you to hand it to him for me." "My soul!" his friend exclaimed. "Why on earth don't you just go down there and tell him?" Adams became piteously embarrassed. He stammered, coughed, stammered again, wrinkling his face so deeply he seemed about to weep; but finally he contrived to utter an apologetic laugh. "I ought to do that, of course, but in some way or other I just don't seem to be able to. I can't manage it." "Why in the world not?" the mystified Lohr inquired. "I could hardly tell you, less'n it is to say that when you've been with one boss all your life it's so kind of embarrassing to quit him. I just can't make up my mind to go and speak to him about it. No, I got it in my head a letter's the only satisfactory way to do it, and I thought I'd ask you to hand it to him." "Well, of course I don't mind doing that for you," Lohr said, mildly. "But why in the world don't you just mail it to him?" "Well, I'll tell you," Adams returned. "You know, like that, it'd have to go through a clerk and that kind of secretary of his, and I don't know who all. There's a couple of kind of delicate points I want to put in it. For instance, I want to explain to him how much improvement and so on I'm going to introduce on the old process I helped to work out with Campbell when we were working for him, so's he'll understand it's a different article and no infringement at all. Then there's another thing. You see, all during while I was sick he had my salary paid to me. It amounts to considerable, I was on my back so long. Under the circumstances, because I'm quitting, I don't feel as if I ought to accept it, so I'll have to have a check for him in the letter to cover it, and I want to be sure he knows it and gets it personally. If it had to go through a lot of other people, the way it would if I put it in the mail, why, you can't tell. So what I thought, if you'd hand it to him for me, and maybe if he happened to read it right then or anything, it might be you'd notice whatever he happened to say about it, and you could tell me afterward." "All right," Lohr said. "Certainly if you'd rather do it that way, I'll hand it to him and tell you what he says. That is, if he says anything, and I hear him. Got it written?" "No. I'll send it around to you the last of the week." Adams moved toward his taxicab. "Don't say anything to anybody about it, Charley, especially till after that." "All right. And, Charley, I'll be mighty obliged to you," Adams said, and he came back to shake hands in farewell. "There's one more thing you might do. If you ever happen to feel like it—" He kept his eyes rather vaguely fixed on a point above his friend's head as he spoke, and his voice was not well controlled. I've been down there a good many years, and I might not have been so much use lately as I was at first, but I always tried to do my best for the old firm. If anything turned out so's they did kind of take offense with me down there, why, just say a good word for me, if you happen to feel like it, maybe." Old Charley Lohr assured him that he would speak a good word if the opportunity became available. Then, after the cab had driven away, he went up to his small apartment on the third floor and muttered ruminatively until his wife inquired what he was talking to himself about. "Old Virg Adams," he told her. "He's out again after his long spell of sickness, and the way it looks to me, he'd 'a' better stayed in bed." "You mean he still looks too bad to be out?" "Oh, I expect he's getting his health back," Lohr said, frowning. "Then what's the matter with him? You mean he's lost his mind?" "My goodness, women do jump at conclusions!" he exclaimed. "Well," said Mrs. Lore, "what other conclusion did you leave me to jump at?" Her husband explained with a little heat. "People can have a sickness that affects their mind, can't it? Their mind can get some affected without being lost, can't it?" "Then you mean the poor man's mind does seem affected?" "Well, no, I'd scarcely go as far as that," Lohr said, inconsistently, and declined to be more definite. Adams devoted the latter part of that evening to the composition of his letter, a disquieting task not completed when, at 11 o'clock, he heard his daughter coming up the stairs. She was singing to herself in a low, sweet voice, and Adams paused to listen incredulously, with his pen lifted and his mouth open, as if he heard the strangest sound in the world. Then he set down the pen upon a blotter, went to his door, and opened it, looking out at her as she came. "Well, dearie, you seem to be feeling pretty good," he said. "Where you been?" "Just sitting out on the front steps, Papa." "All alone, I suppose?" "No. Mr. Russell called." "Oh, he did?" Adams pretended to be surprised. "What all could you and he find to talk about till this hour of the night?" She laughed gaily. "You don't know me, Papa." "How's that?" "You never found out that I always do all the talking." "Didn't you let him get a word in all evening?" "Oh, yes, every now and then." Adams took her hand and petted it. "Well, what did he say?" Alice gave him a radiant look and kissed him. "Not what you think," she laughed, then slapped his cheek with saucy affection, pirouetted across the narrow hall and into her own room, and curtsied to him as she closed her door. Adams went back to his writing with a lighter heart, for since Alice was born she had been to him the apple of his eye, his own phrase in thinking of her, and what he was doing now was for her. He smiled as he picked up his pen to begin a new draft of that painful letter, but presently he looked puzzled. After all, she could be happy just as things were, it seemed. Then why had he taken what his wife called this new step, which he had so long resisted? He could only sigh and wonder. Life works out pretty peculiarly, he thought, for he couldn't go back now, though the reason he couldn't was not clearly apparent. He had to go ahead. End of chapter 16.